Welcome back, dear traveller. When we last left the Iberian Peninsula, it was a spring morning in the year 711. Ships were moving through the half-light, crossing the narrow stretch of water between North Africa and Europe. A commander named Tariq ibn Ziyad stood watching as the first sunlight touched the great rock that would one day carry his name. Behind him lay the sea. Before him, a Visigothic kingdom already beginning to fracture. And beyond that, though no one standing on the shore could yet have understood it, lay nearly 8 centuries of history. If this is your first time traveling with us, all you need to know is this. We are on the Iberian Peninsula, that great body of land reaching south from Europe between the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. And we are about to enter one of the most extraordinary chapters in the history of the Western world. Settle in. Allow your body to become still. Take a long, slow breath and let it go. We are going to Córdoba. Al-Andalus, a civilization at the crossroads of the world. When Muslim forces crossed into Iberia in 711, they defeated the weakened Visigothic kingdom with remarkable speed. Within only a few years, most of the peninsula had passed under Muslim rule. But the world that developed there was not created in a single moment, and it did not arrive fully formed with the first armies. Over the generations that followed, Iberia became connected to a vast intellectual and commercial world stretching from Córdoba and Damascus to Cairo, Baghdad, Persia, and beyond them, India and Central Asia. It was a world in which ideas traveled. Ancient Greek philosophy was translated into Arabic. Medical knowledge from Greece, Persia, and India was studied, questioned, and expanded. Astronomers observed the sky. Mathematicians developed algebra and helped transmit the Indian numerical system, including the number 0 across the Islamic world, and eventually into Europe. Aristotle, Plato, Hippocrates, and Euclid were not simply preserved, they were debated, corrected, built upon. And, in time, much of that knowledge would pass into the cities of the Iberian Peninsula. The territory governed by Muslim rulers became known as Al-Andalus. At its greatest extent, it covered nearly all of what is now Spain and Portugal. Within it, cities grew, trade flourished, scholarship deepened, and architecture reached heights that can still leave a visitor speechless. It is important, however, not to turn Al-Andalus into a perfect world that never existed. It was not uniformly peaceful. There were wars within it and along its borders. There were rebellions, dynastic rivalries, periods of persecution, and sudden changes in power. There were social divisions and legal inequalities. Coexistence did not mean equality. Muslims occupied the dominant political and legal position. Christians and Jews could often practice their religions and manage many of their own communal affairs, but their freedoms varied from one ruler and one century to another. There were periods of tolerance. There were also periods of violence and forced conversion. Al-Andalus contained the full and complicated range of human behavior. And yet, for long periods of the medieval age, something genuinely unusual happened there. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in the same cities. They prayed in mosques, churches, and synagogues. They spoke Arabic, Latin, Hebrew, and the evolving Romance languages of the peninsula. They met in markets, palaces, workshops, and courts. They borrowed from one another. Architectural forms crossed religious boundaries. Musical traditions mingled. Recipes, agricultural techniques, scientific ideas, and fragments of language moved from one community to another. Historians have often used the Spanish word convivencia to describe this world. Living together, not always peacefully, not always equally, but living, working, and creating within sight and sound of one another. Even the English language carries distant echoes of the intellectual world connected to Al-Andalus. Algebra comes from the Arabic al-Jabr, Algorithm comes from the Latinized name of the Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi. Words such as sugar, cotton, orange, and coffee passed through Arabic-speaking commercial networks before entering European languages by different routes. But in Spanish, the inheritance is far deeper. It is present in thousands of ordinary words. Aceite for oil, azúcar for sugar, algodón for cotton, almohada for pillow, alcalde for mayor. It survives in the names of rivers and towns. The Guadalquivir, the great river running through Córdoba and Seville, takes its name from the Arabic al-Wadi al-Kabir, the great river. And every time a Spanish speaker says ojalá, hopefully God willing, the language carries a distant echo of the Arabic expression inshallah. The centuries of Al-Andalus did not disappear when its kingdoms disappeared. They remained in speech, in food, in music, in the names of places, in the patterns carved into walls. But to understand what Al-Andalus could become at its height, we must visit its greatest city. In the 10th century, that city was Córdoba. Córdoba, the great city of Western Europe. It is late in the 10th century. You are standing outside Córdoba on a warm afternoon near the end of September. Before you lies a city of a size almost impossible to find elsewhere in Western Europe. No one can know its population with certainty. Medieval numbers are difficult to trust, and modern estimates vary widely. Córdoba may have held more than 100,000 people. It may have held considerably more. Whatever the exact figure, one thing is clear. It was the greatest city in Western Europe. London was still a relatively small settlement beside the Thames. Paris occupied only a fraction of the city it would later become. Rome, once the ruler of an empire, was a place of ancient ruins, shrinking neighborhoods, and abandoned monuments. Córdoba was alive, its houses and workshops extended across the landscape. Merchants entered through its gates. Barges moved along the Guadalquivir. The sounds of craftsmen, animals, traders, and running water filled its streets. Many of those streets were paved. Chroniclers described principal roads, illuminated by oil lamps after sunset, allowing people to move through parts of the city at night. There were public baths where people came not only to wash, but to rest, talk, and conduct business. There were physicians, apothecaries, and scholars of medicine. There were markets filled with leatherwork, ceramics, metal, silk, spices, and paper. And there were books. In much of medieval Europe, a single manuscript could require months or years of labor. Books were rare, expensive objects, often preserved in monasteries and chained to reading desks. In Córdoba, there were booksellers. Copyists sat behind open shop fronts reproducing texts by hand. Binders stitched pages together. Scholars searched for works of medicine, mathematics, philosophy, theology, astronomy, and poetry. Books could be purchased, discussed, borrowed, copied, carried home. The gardens of Córdoba were fed by sophisticated systems of irrigation. Water wheels, channels, cisterns, and underground pipes drawing upon Roman, Persian, and local engineering traditions. Orange trees grew in courtyards. Jasmine climbed across pale walls. Vegetable gardens and orchards surrounded the city. And during the heat of an Andalusian summer, the sound of water was everywhere. Water falling into a basin. Water moving through a narrow channel. Water turning the wooden wheel of a mill. In a dry land, water was not merely practical, it was beautiful. It suggested abundance, coolness, and life. It was necessary, and it was sacred. One of Córdoba's most learned rulers was the Caliph Al-Hakam II, who reigned from 961 to 976. Medieval chroniclers claimed that his library contained hundreds of thousands of volumes. The number may have grown in the telling. Medieval writers often used enormous figures to express magnificence rather than provide a precise inventory. But the library was undoubtedly extraordinary. Al-Hakam employed agents across the Islamic world, from Cairo and Damascus to Baghdad, to search for manuscripts and send copies back to Córdoba. He read catalogues of new acquisitions. He placed notes in the margins of books. He supported copyists, translators, poets, and scholars. He treated knowledge as other rulers treated armies, as a source of authority and power, but also as something without which he could not imagine living. At the heart of Córdoba, near the banks of the Guadalquivir, stood the city's greatest monument, the Great Mosque, the Mezquita. Its construction had begun in the 8th century, and successive rulers enlarged it over generations. Each extension expanded its prayer hall and added new layers of decoration. Step inside. Leave the white Andalusian sunlight behind you. Wait for your eyes to adjust. At first, there is only shadow. Then the building slowly reveals itself. What you see resembles a forest. Hundreds of columns rise from the floor, marble, granite, and jasper in shades of grey, red, cream, and pale gold. Above them are double arches, alternating red brick and white stone. The arches repeat in every direction. From almost anywhere in the prayer hall, you can look through one arch and see another. And then another. Column after column disappears into the distance until stone and shadow seem to merge. There is no single point upon which the eye can settle. The building appears to continue beyond itself, as though you have stepped into a dream of infinity made from geometry and light. Sunlight enters through small openings and falls in long, gentle beams across the floor. The air is cool, even in summer, and the silence inside such a space feels almost physical. It is as though the building itself is breathing, slowly, deeply, at rest. The Great Mosque still stands. You can enter it today. After Christian forces took Córdoba in 1236, the mosque was consecrated as a cathedral. Chapels were gradually added, and during the 16th century, a large Renaissance choir and nave were constructed inside the former prayer hall. Tradition says that when Emperor Charles V saw what had been done, he told the cathedral authorities that they had destroyed something unique in the world to build something that could have been built anywhere. Whether he spoke those exact words or not, the tension remains visible. A Christian cathedral stands within an Islamic mosque. One sacred space has been placed inside another. History has not erased the earlier building. It has built through it. The forest of columns remains. The red and white arches remain. The cool, shadowed interior remains, and people still fall silent when they enter. The Alhambra, a palace beyond ordinary understanding. Now we must travel. From Córdoba, we move east and south through the olive-covered hills of Andalusia. The land begins to rise. In the distance appear the mountains of the Sierra Nevada, the southernmost great mountain range in Spain. Even when the plains below are hot, snow can remain upon the highest peaks, bright against an impossibly blue sky. At the foot of those mountains lies Granada, and above Granada, upon a long red hill overlooking the city, there is a palace, the Alhambra. Its name probably comes from the Arabic Alhambra, the red one. It was built and enlarged during the 13th and 14th centuries by the Nasrid dynasty, the final Muslim rulers of the Iberian Peninsula. By then, Al-Andalus had been reduced to the small kingdom of Granada. Christian kingdoms controlled most of the peninsula and continued to press southward. The Nasrids knew that their kingdom was vulnerable. They negotiated. They paid tribute. They formed alliances with Christian rulers and Muslim rulers alike. They watched the territory around them grow smaller, and during this long retreat, they created the most refined palace Al-Andalus would ever produce. There is something quietly defiant about it, a civilization facing the possibility of its own ending chose not merely to build stronger walls, it chose to create beauty. Let us walk through it slowly. There is no need to hurry. Enter through the Gate of Justice, a great horseshoe arch set into warm red stone. A sculpted hand appears above one entrance, a key above another. Pass through the thick exterior walls, defensive and severe, built by people who knew that enemies might one day arrive, and then step inside. The contrast is immediate. Outside, a fortress. Inside, paradise. The rooms of the Alhambra are not enormous by the standards of later European palaces. They are intimate. Their beauty is not created through sheer scale, but through detail. Look upward. The ceilings dissolve into thousands of carved forms. This style is called muqarnas. Small pieces of plaster project and overlap, descending from above like a frozen waterfall, the inside of a shell or a field of stars arranged according to some hidden mathematical order. Light touches the surface and divides into shadow. The ceiling seems solid and weightless at the same time. The walls are covered in carved stucco. Geometric patterns repeat at different scales, each form leading into another. Interlocking lines continue across panels and around windows, creating order so intricate that the eye can follow it without ever reaching an end. Between these patterns runs calligraphy, verses of Arabic poetry, religious texts, praises of the palace and the rulers who built it. The words are carved so delicately that they seem to rest upon the surface rather than cut into it. One phrase appears again and again throughout the palace, above doorways, around arches, along walls, within the tilework. وَلَا غَالِبْ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. There is no victor but God. For the Nasrid dynasty, it was a declaration of faith and a symbol of legitimacy. But within a kingdom slowly losing its long struggle against history, the words carry another meaning. No human victory lasts forever. No ruler keeps a palace forever. No dynasty remains beyond time. The builders may have understood what was coming. They built anyway. They built this. At the center of the palace complex is the Court of the Lions. The courtyard is long and narrow, surrounded by a delicate colonnade of slender marble columns. At its center stands a fountain. 12 marble lions form a circle around its basin. Each supports the weight above it and pours water through its open mouth. From the fountain, narrow channels carry water in 4 directions across the floor. The design suggests the rivers of paradise described in Islamic tradition. Water moves through the courtyard with a quiet, continuous murmur. It reflects the columns. It catches the light. It cools the air. The fountain has occupied this space since the 14th century. Its water system has been repaired and restored many times, but the sound still fills the court. In 1829, the American writer Washington Irving lived for a time within the neglected palace. The Alhambra was no longer the center of a royal court. Parts of it had fallen into disrepair. Families, soldiers, travelers and wanderers occupied its abandoned chambers. Irving listened to the water. He explored the dark corridors and empty rooms. He collected legends from the people living there, and later transformed them into tales of the Alhambra. The palace seemed to him suspended between the present and the past. In some ways, it still does. Walk now into the Hall of the Ambassadors. This was the great throne room, the largest ceremonial chamber in the palace. Its walls are almost completely covered in carved plaster, tile work, and calligraphy. High above is a wooden dome assembled from thousands of individual pieces. The pattern is arranged in 7 concentric levels, traditionally interpreted as the 7 heavens of Islamic cosmology. The ceiling seems to open upward, a universe formed from cedar wood. Stand beside one of the windows. Below you lies Granada. White buildings descend along the hillside towards the plain. Beyond them rise the Sierra Nevada, and above the mountains, the sky. Snow on the distant peaks shines in the afternoon light. The sultans of Granada sat here and looked upon this same landscape. For 2.5 centuries, this palace was the center of the last Muslim kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula. The people who stood in this room are gone. The kingdom they governed is gone. But what they imagined, designed, and created upon this red hill remains. 3 religions, 1 land, the difficult beauty of convivencia. So far, we have spoken mainly of Muslim rulers and the monuments they left behind. But medieval Spain was never only one story. It was many stories unfolding in the same place at the same time, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension, always in proximity. Jewish communities had lived on the Iberian Peninsula long before the Muslim conquest. Under some rulers of Al-Andalus, they experienced periods of intellectual, artistic, and political flourishing rarely available to Jewish communities elsewhere in medieval Europe. Jewish physicians served at Muslim courts. Jewish diplomats traveled between kingdoms. Poets composed works in both Hebrew and Arabic. Philosophers entered debates shared by thinkers of all 3 faiths. These periods should not be mistaken for permanent security. Jewish life could change suddenly when a new ruler or dynasty came to power. But during its finest moments, the culture of Al-Andalus allowed remarkable figures to emerge. The greatest of them was Moses Maimonides. He was born in Córdoba in 1138. A physician, philosopher, and religious scholar of astonishing range, Maimonides attempted to reconcile Jewish religious tradition with the philosophy of Aristotle. His most famous work, The Guide for the Perplexed, examined the relationship between reason, scripture, and the nature of God. Jewish thinkers read it. Muslim thinkers engaged with its ideas. Christian philosophers studied and quoted it. Thomas Aquinas knew his work. A Jewish scholar raised in Muslim Spain helped shape the intellectual framework of medieval Christian Europe. Maimonides did not remain in Córdoba. When he was young, the Almohads, a new and much more severe Muslim dynasty, took control of the city. The period of relative openness ended. Jewish and Christian communities faced persecution and pressure to convert. Maimonides and his family fled. They spent years moving from place to place before eventually settling in Egypt. There, Maimonides became a physician associated with the court of Al-Fadil, the powerful vizier and administrator who served Saladin. Consider the journey contained within that single life. A Jewish child born in Córdoba, forced from his home by a Muslim dynasty. Becoming a physician in an Islamic court in Egypt. Writing philosophy that would be studied by Jewish, Muslim, and Christian thinkers for centuries. Medieval history is far stranger, more interconnected, and more human than the simple divisions we often use to describe it. Christians also continued to live within Al-Andalus. They became known as Mozarabs, a word meaning roughly Arabized. They remained Christian, but many adopted the Arabic language and elements of the culture surrounding them. Some wrote and spoke Arabic in daily life while continuing to use Latin in worship. Their churches incorporated horseshoe arches and decorative forms found in Islamic architecture. Their music, food, clothing, and customs carried the influence of the cities in which they lived. They were Christians formed within an Islamic civilization, not entirely one thing, not entirely another, something distinctively their own. And then there was Toledo. Christian forces took Toledo in 1085. The city had been a Visigothic capital before the Muslim conquest, and under Islamic rule it had become a center of learning with communities of Muslims, Christians, and Jews. When it passed into Christian hands, its libraries remained. Within them were Arabic manuscripts containing works of medicine, astronomy, mathematics, philosophy, and natural science. Some preserved ideas inherited from the ancient world. Others contained discoveries and commentaries produced by scholars writing in Arabic. European scholars wanted to read them, but many could not understand the language, and so translators began to arrive. They came from England, France, Italy, and other parts of Europe. A scholar who knew Latin might sit beside a Jewish or Christian interpreter who understood Arabic and one of the local Romance languages. Together, they worked through manuscripts line by line. An Arabic passage would be spoken aloud. Its meaning would be explained in the local language. Then, it would be written in Latin. Through this slow, collaborative process, ideas moved from one civilization into another. Works by Aristotle returned to Western European readers accompanied by centuries of Arabic commentary. Medical texts associated with figures such as Avicenna became part of European education. The astronomical tables of Al-Andalus influenced the study of the heavens. The mathematical traditions of the Islamic world entered European universities. The intellectual revival, sometimes called the Renaissance of the 12th century, did not begin in only one place. But a substantial part of it passed through rooms in Toledo, where people of different languages and religions sat beside one another and tried to understand the same page. They could not have known exactly what they were beginning, but they were helping to change the direction of European thought. The Reconquista, 8 centuries of complicated change. While the great cities of Al-Andalus flourished in the south, the northern reaches of the peninsula were very different. In the green, rain-soaked mountains of Asturias, the landscape bears little resemblance to the sunlit plains of Andalusia. Clouds gather above steep valleys. Rain falls frequently and with conviction. Dense forests cover the slopes. Narrow passes wind between mountains. Here, small Christian territories survived the Muslim conquest. Geography protected them. The mountains were difficult to cross and even harder to control. The land offered little reward for the cost of complete occupation. From these northern territories, Christian kingdoms gradually expanded. This process is traditionally called the Reconquista, the reconquest. But the word can make 8 centuries of history sound far simpler than they were. There was no single continuous campaign stretching neatly from 711 to 1492. The people living in the 8th or 9th century were not all following a shared plan designed to reach Granada hundreds of years later. Borders moved forwards and backwards. Kingdoms divided and reunited. Christian rulers fought one another. Muslim rulers fought one another. Christian kings formed alliances with Muslim emirs against other Christian kings. Muslim rulers hired Christian soldiers. Christian rulers hired Muslim soldiers. Religion mattered deeply. So did land, dynasty, money, family, personal ambition, and survival. One figure captures these contradictions better than almost anyone. Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, El Cid. He was born in Castile during the 11th century, probably around 1043. He fought for Christian rulers. He also entered the service of Muslim rulers. His enemies and allies knew him by names drawn from 2 cultures. El Cid came from the Arabic Al-Sayyid, the Lord. El Campeador meant the champion or master of the battlefield. In 1094, Rodrigo captured Valencia and ruled it as an independent lord until his death in 1099. Later generations transformed him into an uncomplicated Christian hero of the Reconquista. The real man was more interesting. He moved through a world in which loyalty was political as often as religious, and where the frontier between Christian and Muslim territory was not simply a line between 2 civilizations. It was a place of exchange, rivalry, opportunity, and constant negotiation. The great medieval poem inspired by him, The Song of My Cid, was composed during the following century. It is the earliest great surviving epic of Castilian literature. The poem's hero fights for honor, family, and the restoration of his reputation. He respects Muslim allies. He treats Christian enemies with pragmatic severity. He is courageous, but he is not presented as invulnerable. He weeps when he is exiled. He worries about his wife and daughters. He calculates before battle. His horse is given a name. His financial difficulties matter. His domestic life matters. At moments, he seems less like a distant medieval legend and more like a character from a modern novel. Specific, contradictory, human. The balance of power on the peninsula shifted decisively during the 12th and 13th centuries. The kingdoms of Castile and Leon were eventually united. The crown of Aragon grew through a dynastic union with the county of Barcelona and expanded across the Mediterranean. Portugal emerged as an independent kingdom along the Atlantic coast. And in 1212, a combined Christian force defeated the Almohad army at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. Knights from Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and Portugal fought in the campaign. The victory did not end Muslim rule in Iberia, but it broke the power of the Almohad state and opened the southern territories to further Christian expansion. The great cities fell in succession: Córdoba in 1236, Valencia in 1238, Seville in 1248. Only Granada remained, small, mountainous, protected by the Sierra Nevada, enriched by trade, agriculture, and the production of silk. For another 2.5 centuries, the Nasrid kingdom survived through diplomacy, tribute, geography, and political skill, until, at last, it could survive no longer. 1492, Granada falls, Columbus sails, and the world turns. The year 1492 is one of those years into which history seems to have placed too much, as though the calendar itself could barely contain what was happening. It began in January. On the second day of that month, Muhammad XII, the final Sultan of Granada, known to the Spanish as Boabdil, surrendered the city to Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. The war for Granada had lasted for years. It had involved sieges, raids, negotiations, internal divisions, and the gradual destruction of the kingdom's ability to resist. Its final moment did not arrive through one last heroic battle. It arrived through an agreement. The terms of surrender were, on paper, relatively generous. Muslims were promised the right to practice their religion. Their property was to be respected. Their laws and customs were to receive protection. Jewish residents were also offered certain guarantees. Those promises would not last. But on that January morning, at least, they had been written. The Alhambra changed hands without being destroyed. Ferdinand and Isabella entered the palace built by the Nasrid rulers and chose to preserve much of it. Christian banners rose above the towers. The final Muslim kingdom in Iberia had come to an end. According to tradition, Boabdil left the city with his household and remaining followers. He crossed the plain south of Granada and began climbing into the mountains. At a high point along the road, where a traveller could look back towards the city one final time, he stopped his horse. Below him stood Granada. Above it, the Alhambra rested on its red hill. Behind it rose the snow-covered Sierra Nevada. Boabdil looked back, and he wept. The story says that his mother, Aixa, was riding beside him. Seeing his tears, she told him that he did well to weep like a woman for what he had failed to defend like a man. Whether she used those exact words is impossible to know. The scene was shaped by chroniclers and retold by generations who wanted the fall of Granada to possess a final, memorable image. And the judgment placed upon Boabdil is easy to question. He inherited a divided kingdom surrounded by enemies far stronger than himself. His surrender may have prevented the destruction of Granada and the deaths of many of its people, but the image remains. a man upon a mountain road, looking back at a home he will never possess again, weeping as it disappears from his life. The place still has a name: El Suspiro del Moro, the Moor's last sigh. Travelers still stop near the mountain pass south of Granada and look back. The Alhambra can be seen in the distance, small upon its hill. The white city lies below it. The mountains rise behind it. Most visitors know the story, and many discover that the view produces an emotion difficult to name. It is not entirely sadness, not entirely wonder, something quiet between the two. Boabdil has been gone for more than 5 centuries. The landscape still does to others what, according to the story, it did to him. Only a few months after Granada's surrender, Ferdinand and Isabella issued an edict ordering practicing Jews to leave their kingdoms unless they converted to Christianity. It became known as the Alhambra Decree because it was signed in the palace that had just passed into Christian hands. Jewish families were given only a few months to settle their affairs. Homes and possessions had to be sold. Businesses had to be abandoned or transferred. Communities that had existed on the peninsula for centuries were broken apart. The number of people who left cannot be known with certainty. Estimates vary widely. Tens of thousands departed, perhaps considerably more. Some traveled to North Africa, others found refuge in Portugal, Italy, the Netherlands, or the expanding Ottoman Empire. They carried with them their prayers, recipes, family traditions, and forms of Spanish that would continue to be spoken by Sephardic communities for centuries. A later tradition claims that the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid II mocked Ferdinand for weakening his own realm, while enriching the Ottoman lands with skilled refugees. Whether or not he said it, the refugees brought knowledge, craftsmanship, and commercial experience wherever they settled. Spain had completed its political unification, but it had also begun to narrow the meaning of who could belong within it. And then, in August of that same year, another journey began. A Genoese mariner named Christopher Columbus had spent years attempting to persuade European rulers to finance a voyage westward across the Atlantic. He believed that Asia could be reached by sailing west from Europe. His understanding of the Earth's circumference was badly mistaken. The distance to Asia was far greater than he imagined. But Ferdinand and Isabella agreed to support the expedition. On the 3rd of August, 1492, Columbus sailed from the port of Palos in Andalusia. 3 vessels carried approximately 90 men: the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. After stopping in the Canary Islands, they entered the open Atlantic. For weeks, they saw nothing but sea. Then, on the 12th of October, land appeared. It was not Asia. It was an island in the Bahamas. The people living there had their own names, languages, histories, and worlds, none of which Columbus understood. The voyage would begin an age of contact, conquest, exchange, disease, migration, wealth, and destruction on a scale no one aboard those ships could have imagined. The world, which had already turned once in January, turned again. The Moor's last sigh and what survived. History rarely ends cleanly. The surrender of Granada in January 1492 ended the political existence of Al-Andalus. It did not cause Islamic culture in Spain to disappear overnight. The people remained. Large Muslim communities continued to live in territories brought under Christian rule. They were known as Mudejar. At first, many were permitted to practice Islam, maintain mosques, speak Arabic, and preserve their customs under the terms of surrender agreements. Mudejar craftsmen continued to work throughout Christian Spain. They built palaces, churches, and synagogues using brick, carved plaster, wooden ceilings, geometric tile work, and horseshoe arches. The architecture of the Christian kingdoms absorbed the visual language of Al-Andalus. Even after Muslim political power had vanished, Muslim hands continued to shape Spanish buildings. But the promises made at Granada did not endure. Pressure to convert increased. In Granada, forced conversions and unrest began before the end of the century. By the early 16th century, Muslims in Castile were ordered to accept Christianity or leave. Similar measures later reached Aragon. Many converted, at least publicly. These converts and their descendants became known as Moriscos. For another century, Morisco communities remained part of Spanish life. They farmed, traded, produced silk, maintained irrigation systems, worked as craftsmen and laborers. Some practiced Christianity sincerely. Some preserved Islamic customs privately. Many combined fragments of both traditions. All lived under increasing suspicion. Authorities searched for signs of forbidden behavior, the use of Arabic, traditional clothing, certain foods, bathing practices, songs, weddings. Anything could be interpreted as evidence that conversion had not been genuine. Between 1609 and 1614, the Spanish monarchy ordered the expulsion of the Moriscos. Roughly 300,000 people were forced to leave. Many had been born into Christian families. Most had never lived anywhere except Spain. Some no longer spoke Arabic. They were placed aboard ships and sent towards North Africa, arriving in lands their ancestors may have left centuries before. They were treated as foreigners in the country they had been forced to abandon, and sometimes as foreigners in the countries to which they were sent. Their descendants settled in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and elsewhere around the Mediterranean. They carried memories of Andalusia with them, family names, recipes, embroidery, architectural traditions, fragments of poetry, melodies. Stories are still told of families who preserved old keys said to have belonged to houses in Granada, Córdoba, Seville, or Toledo. Whether every key can truly be traced to a particular doorway matters less than what the object came to represent. A house left behind. A door that could no longer be opened. A place that remained part of a family's identity long after it had ceased to be part of its daily life. The music of Al-Andalus also survived. Traditions of Andalusi classical music were preserved across North Africa, known by names such as Al-Ala in Morocco and Malouf in Algeria and Tunisia. The music was transmitted through generations, teacher to student, parent to child, often by memory rather than writing. It is still performed. Listen to it, and across centuries of exile and preservation, you can hear distant echoes of the courts of Córdoba and Granada. The songs remember even when the first people who sang them are gone. Walk through the old quarter of Córdoba on a warm afternoon. The walls are white, the streets are narrow. You pass beneath a small balcony filled with flowers. Then you find a doorway standing partly open. Step through it. Inside is a courtyard. A fountain rests at its center. Orange trees rise from the stone. Jasmine climbs along the walls. From somewhere beyond sight comes the smell of food being prepared. This is not the Córdoba of Al-Hakam II. The caliphs are gone. The scholars, merchants, and copyists are gone. The people who first designed these courtyards disappeared centuries ago. And yet, you are standing within their inheritance. The water, the shade, the garden enclosed within the house. The belief that a private space should contain beauty, coolness, and the sound of life. 1,000 years of history remain around you. Nothing survived unchanged, but nothing disappeared completely. And so we arrive, gently, at the end of the second part of our journey through Spain. We have walked through the illuminated streets of 10th century Córdoba, surrounded by people going about their lives in the greatest city in Western Europe. We have entered the forest of columns inside the Great Mosque and watched soft light fall across the red and white arches. We have travelled slowly through the rooms of the Alhambra, the carved ceilings, the Court of the Lions. the fountain whose water has murmured within the palace since the 14th century. We have sat beside the translators of Toledo as they transformed Arabic manuscripts into Latin and, without fully understanding what they were beginning, helped change the direction of European thought. We have followed El Cid across a frontier where loyalty, ambition, and survival were rarely as simple as later legends wished them to be. And we have watched Boabdil stop upon a mountain road and look back towards Granada. We have also tried to hold, without looking away, but without taking pleasure in suffering, the full weight of what was lost when the centuries of Al-Andalus came to an end. The homes abandoned, the communities broken, the languages silenced, the people forced to leave the only country they had ever known. And we have seen what survived despite it all, in stone, in music, in food, in gardens, in the names of rivers and towns, and in ordinary words still spoken every morning in a country shaped by every civilization that has passed through it. History is rarely simple. Perhaps the best we can do is look at it honestly and with something resembling tenderness. Tenderness for the people who lived through it in all their complexity, people who loved and feared, built and destroyed, stayed and fled, remembered and forgot. People who, as human beings have always done, tried to create something beautiful while the world around them changed. Soon our journey will continue into Spain's golden age. We will enter the worlds of Cervantes and Velázquez. We will follow explorers and conquistadors across oceans and watch an empire expand beyond anything its rulers could have imagined. We will stand before Las Meninas. We will see Napoleon make one of the greatest mistakes of his reign. We will enter the dark visions of Goya. We will pass through civil war and 40 years of dictatorship, and then we will watch as color, music, and defiant joy return to the streets, and Spain begins, at last, to recognize itself in the modern world. That will be the third and final part of our journey, modern Spain. Until then, dear traveler.